A lobster roll can be an expensive sandwich, but in 1621, Edward Winslow wrote about an abundance of lobster and seafood in Plymouth Bay. So, how did a seafood of such abundance become a luxury today? Hello, and welcome to the Iron Spoon Kitchen, where today the Iron Spoon is amongst a bunch of lobster tails, and I'm going to be diving into the wonderful history of the lobster, and especially up in Maine and Connecticut. And so, first thing we need to do is find out, how did we get these cooked lobsters in front of me? So let's go back a few minutes ago, and I'll show you how I did that. Looks like our water is about to boil. I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of just regular old table salt. That's step 1. And we'll let it keep boiling. This is not too hard, this part. We've got a good roaring boil here, and here's our lobster. I think you can see that. Get a little closer. So let's just put these in and see how it goes. I know how to cook shrimp. And I think from what I've read, you need to let it cook for about 5 minutes. I did reduce the heat down to medium, so I just want to let you know that. And I did put this lid on there. And let's see what we have here. That's been 5 minutes, and it might need just a little bit longer, but I want it to be not completely done because I'm going to cook it up a little bit in the butter in the skillet in just a little bit. These have been cooling for quite some time now, so it is now time to get the lobster out of there. And I have absolutely no idea how to do this. Well, actually, I did do a little research, but this is the first time I've cooked lobster. I've only had it in restaurants. So let's see how this goes. In fact, why don't you come over a little bit closer so you can see all the mistakes I'm going to make. Okay, I've seen several different ways, and I'm sure there are some experts out there, obviously from Maine and Connecticut and New England, which those are New England. So this way, just doing the sides here. See if I can do this without stabbing myself. That seemed to work pretty good. Oh yeah, coming right out. Okay. Maybe not the best technique, but hey, we got all the lobster. And that's the name of the game, isn't it? Okay. Success! I must be proud of myself. I will show you, here's the first one I did. Did not come out as good. But this one looks great. So I'm going to finish these others and we'll get right to the cooking. I'm going to cut this up into some 3/4 inch chunks. And then be moving to the pan and the butter. But before I do that, let's delve into how in the world did this become such a luxury food? Take a look at this. I think you'll find it interesting. Before it was a luxury on a white tablecloth, the lobster was just dinner. Sometimes the dinner nobody wanted. Today we're tracing how this armored bottom-dwelling creature went from prison food to the crown jewel of Maine's economy. And along the way, we're going to settle a disagreement that's been simmering in New England kitchens for at least a century. Butter or mayonnaise? Long before European ships arrived, Native American communities were already harvesting lobster along the Maine coast. In 1622, English explorer Thomas Morton described watching native groups gather in the hundreds at spots where the tide brought the lobsters in close to shore, eating some fresh and drying the rest to store for later. The first written record of a lobster catch by Europeans comes from 1605, when English explorer George Weymouth's crew stopped at Monhegan Island. A crew member logged that they'd hauled in around 30 exceptionally large lobsters. And by large, they meant it. Lobsters in this era weren't the 2-pounder you'd get today. Some historical accounts describe specimens 4, even 5 feet long. I read a colonist's own account of just how plentiful lobster was in these early years. Riding home to England in December of 1621, Plymouth settler Edward Winslow described the surrounding waters as full of lobster all summer long. In fact, historians note he called them infinite, and by his own account, downright delicious. It's one of the earliest first-hand records confirming what the archaeological evidence already suggested. This coastline was simply teeming with lobster. Here's the twist. For most of early American history, lobster was not a delicacy. It was a mark of poverty. So embarrassing that pre-revolution Mainers buried the shells rather than let them pile up outside their house. Even into the 1800s, lobster sold for barely a penny and a half for a pound. The real lobster industry didn't exist until canneries arrived in the 1840s. Before that, catching lobster was a backyard chore, sending the kids down to grab a few from under the rockweed. By 1870, Maine had 23 lobster canneries, and the shellfish suddenly had a shelf life and a shipping range it never had before. Labels like Red Jacket, a brand, show just how polished the canning business had already become. Red Jacket brand was packed by Burnham and Morrill, right in Portland. They even touted a gold medal won at the Paris exhibition in 1878. It's a striking contrast. Bold, confident branding for a product that, not too many decades earlier, people were embarrassed to be seen eating. And it's right around this same era that lobster takes its first step toward becoming a sandwich. In 1844, the 30th edition, page 120, Lydia Marie Child of Massachusetts published The American Frugal Housewife, and in it was the first known recipe for a cold lobster salad. Meat bound in a dressing of egg yolk, oil, vinegar, mustard, and cayenne, tossed with fine-cut lettuce. It sounds like a small footnote, but food historians consider it the single most important stepping stone toward the lobster roll as we know it. By the last quarter of the 1800s, some version of Child's lobster salad was showing up in nearly every cookbook published in the Northeast. In 1895, Maine passed a minimum size limit, a law meant to protect young lobsters so they could grow and reproduce. It worked exactly as intended, but it also had a side effect. It outlawed the small lobsters the canneries depended on. Many canneries closed on the spot, others simply relocated across the border into Canada. As refrigerated rail cars were developed in the 1870s and 1880s, it was possible to ship live lobster to cities like Boston, New York, and most points south and west. The Tiffany Refrigerator Car Company pioneered the first successful refrigerated rail car in 1877. With this invention, lobster created a cultural shift, and it became fine dining. In addition, wealthy families summering in places like Bar Harbor developed a taste for lobster, and when they returned home, they could now get it by rail, creating the elevated status of lobster. By the turn of the century, you can already see the shift happening. What was once poverty food and was starting to show up as the centerpiece of a proper sit-down dinner, a sign that lobster's reputation was climbing right alongside the railroads and tourism bringing wealthier visitors to the state.
Behind the polished dinner parties, this is what the actual industry looked like. A modest, shingled shack right on the beach, dories pulled up on the shore, the everyday rhythm of a working waterfront. Now here's a detail food historians love. In 1904, the World's Fair came to St. Louis, and with it came a wave of German immigrant vendors selling sausages tucked into soft split rolls, the shape we'd now recognize as a hot dog bun. That fair is widely credited with popularizing both the hot dog roll and the ice cream cone nationwide. And it's also where peanut butter made its debut. Watch my peanut butter finger episode for more on that. Years later, someone on the New England coast had the obvious idea, if lobster salad works on lettuce, why not put it in one of those same rolls? No one can point to a single inventor or a single moment, but this is the fork in the road where the lobster roll as a shape, a sandwich, a portable seaside food starts to take form. And this is where Connecticut enters the story. And the story splits in two. Sometime in the 1920s, a restaurant called Perry's in Milford, Connecticut, started serving lobster meat warm, soaked in butter, tucked into a roll. Food writer John F. Mariani, author of the Encyclopedia of American Food and Drink, documented Perry's as one of the earliest known hot buttered lobster rolls on record. Local research and interviews with the restaurant's own descendants traced the dish directly to owner Harry Perry, which is why, to this day, Connecticut lays claim to the hot lobster roll's invention. So why did Maine, of all places, end up on the mayonnaise side of that line? The timing matters. The cold dress style took hold hardest during the Depression, when lobster shacks were working with less than premium meat, and mayonnaise did double duty. It masked imperfect quality, and celery filler stretched a small amount of lobster. It was practical, affordable, and it kept a shack in business during the hard years. Connecticut's fishing towns, working with a different market and a shorter supply chain to fresher meat, never needed that trick. Hot butter was the only addition needed. Even by the 1920s, the very decade Perry's was building its reputation in Connecticut, truly massive lobsters were still turning up, often enough in Maine to make the local paper. Growth wasn't a straight line in the lobster business. In the early 1900s, Maine catches averaged around 13 million pounds a year. Then, in the late 1920s and early 30s, they collapsed to just 5 to 7 million pounds, a period researchers now call the lobster bust. At the same time, conservation laws on the books were being widely and openly ignored. The stock collapse changed everything. As catches kept falling, more fishermen began reporting violations instead of looking the other way, which made enforcement actually effective for the very first time. Through the 1930s, what researchers called the pirate ethic gave way to a genuine conservation ethic, not because of a single new law, but because enough fishermen decided protecting the resource was now in their own interest. By the 1950s, the working lobster shack had become something else entirely, a postcard image, sold to tourists as classic Maine. Flower beds out front, buoys strung along the eaves, traps stacked as much for the camera as for the catch. By the 1960s, Maine and lobster had become inseparable in the public imagination, and the travel industry in Maine knew it. Here is a Maine travel guide from the late 1950s depicting the quintessential Maine lobsterman with a family on vacation. The payoff for a century of conservation is staggering. From the late 1940s through the 1980s, Maine averaged about 20 million pounds of lobster a year. Since 2000, that number has topped 50 million pounds annually, hitting 78 million pounds in 2025. Modern fishermen now catch more lobster in a single year than everything that was caught in all of the 1800s. So here's how the story lands. Maine still dominates the catch. Nobody is challenging that. But the roll itself, the thing most people now picture when they hear lobster roll, increasingly means hot meat and melted butter. The Connecticut style, not the cold mayonnaise salad that spent a century as the New England default. Longtime Connecticut shack owners don't mince words about it either. Ask one and what he thinks about mayonnaise on the lobster roll, and you'll likely get some version of, "That's like putting mayonnaise on caviar." Today, lobster pumps roughly $1 billion a year into Maine's economy, and lobster rolls have spread from Portland to Tokyo. But here's a final fun fact. Despite the state being basically synonymous with lobster, Maine doesn't have a single Red Lobster restaurant. It's simply not needed.
So now you know how this got to be such a wonderful food, and an enjoyable one, and a luxury one as well. Now to the frying pan. Before we get the lobster in here, now these are split top, but they are not very deep, and I don't know how this is going to work, but if I had some better lobster roll bread, I think it would be good. It would be better, needless to say. But I'm going to do the best I can with what I got. Hey, these are nicely toasted. I'm just going to go ahead and take those out. And now to get our butter and shallots. This is 6 tablespoons of butter. I probably should turn that heat down a little bit. And then 1 small shallot chopped up. In fact, here I am chopping it up right here. Well, let's get the finishing touches on our shallot here. And we're just going to cook that a little bit. Oh, I think I have plenty of butter. And I didn't quite cook it all the way through when I boiled it. I think I may have said that earlier, just because I knew I was going to do this part. But the lobster's only going to be in here for like a minute or so, because I don't want it to get rubbery. Hey, let's build our lobster roll. I'm just going to use my fingers here. Yep, I don't think I'm going to have any complaints on this. It smells great too. And I didn't add any additional salt other than what the boiling called for. Well, let's put a few more in there. There's an empty space right there. Well, I don't think that there's any doubt what's next. So you put a little bit of this lemon juice on there. And this is obviously, the Connecticut type of lobster roll. And I'm going to taste this. Which end? We'll start with this end. That is a luxury. I hope you enjoyed this episode. The history behind these sandwiches and foods is just amazing to me. I guess that's why I record them and put them so you can watch them. Well, thank you for joining me today in the Iron Spoon Kitchen for the delicious and luxurious lobster roll.